Good evening, everyone. And thanks for the opportunity to present my research here. As Christopher has already said, my research is part of the broader SEAS program, which is a research program that brings together, I think, more than 30 researchers to look into marine sustainability, meaning looking and aiming to contribute to solving current challenges of marine and coastal communities. And within this program, I started my own project earlier this year with the very short and catchy title, Transitioning Towards Responsible and Circular Aquacultures, Understanding the Entanglements Between Marine Sustainability, Policy and Society. So some of you will be excused by thinking, transitioning towards what now? And what the heck is responsible and circular aquaculture supposed to mean? So since I've been confronted with questions like these before, I thought I use this venue to talk a bit about addressing these questions you might have, and making hopefully a good argument of why it's important to look at these issues. And to make this a bit more concrete, I want to talk about these guys here. So these are larvae of the black soldier fly. And these larvae play an important role in current attempts of developing more sustainable feed for aquaculture. So this is supposed to be salmon feed. And more concretely, the larvae of the black soldier fly are expected to be a good protein source for salmon, for aquacultures. And the fact that these larvae can be produced by using waste, basically, they also would be a sustainable feed source for aquaculture. And as such, these insects are part of a broader attempt of producing more sustainable feed for aquaculture, such as plant-based feeds, microalgae, algae, and other kind of waste from fisheries and aquaculture. So developing these larvae into actual salmon feed poses a quite complex technological problem, you could say. So you have to think about feed security, you have to think about palatability, you have to think about affordability of this type of feed, and so on. But what I want to argue is that the problem these larvae have to solve is actually much bigger. So their job is supposed to make Norwegian aquaculture more sustainable in the sense of making it less harmful to the environment, but also less wasteful when it comes to resource use. And also, they are imagined to decrease the burden that the salmon aquaculture puts on, in social, economic, and environmental terms, on countries outside of Norway, where feed has to be imported. And another job these tiny little creatures are expected to fulfill is to help the Norwegian government in reaching its own targets of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So you can see this is a rather big ask. And in this sense, it is only understandable that the development of insect feed for salmon aquaculture is embedded within broader policies of making Norwegian economy more circular and more responsible. And so when we look at these little insects, larvae, this is actually about broader societal transitions and reimagining Norwegian futures. So, yes, that's also why I chose this picture. So it comes as no surprise that there is currently lots of research going on in this area. So you have university departments looking into this. You have big European-funded research programs like SEAS and me looking into it. But you also have non-university institutions like the Norwegian Food Research Institute, NOFIMA, the Norwegian Research Institute, NORS, but also industry actors like Cargill or Leroy Seafood looking into this. So, and this is why this guy is here. When we talk about the development of insect feed, this is not only about science. So only this brief list of actors I mentioned just now shows you there's a broad range of different actors and interests involved into developing insect feed. So what we're talking about here has been described as technoscience. And this term technoscience is distinct from the kind of more traditional idea of science that you might be familiar with, the pure, disinterested science that this guy here, this gentleman just minding his own business and trying to do his experiments for the advancement of knowledge and science. So when we talk about technoscience, this is a term that developed in the second half of the 20th century to describe the ever closer connection between science on the one hand and innovation or industries on the other side. And yes, next informative slide. So you now might say, okay, so developing sustainable feed is technoscience, but actually this is only part of the story, because neither does this research happen in a vacuum, nor once the biotechnology, in that case salmon feed, is developed and enters the market, is this entering a void. So when we want to understand the impact that such a novel biotechnology might have on society, it's actually good to think of it not only as technoscience, but as technoscience embedded in a larger socio-technical system. And this is where this tomato comes in. And not just this tomato, but actually this machine here. And this is a tomato harvester, which was developed to pull tomato plants out of the ground and put them or pile them as in neat little harvested and hopefully intact tomato piles. And this machine was introduced in the 1940s, and the idea was to make tomato farming more productive and less cost intensive. And one can say that this was a success. So, but there were kind of, and this is where the socio-technical systems come in, there were other implications of the introduction of this machine. For one, tomato farming tended to concentrate around larger farms, so the structure of tomato farming changed. Also the workforce changed, so less workers were needed. In that case, mostly less migrant workers were needed, so the local migrant communities were affected by the introduction of this technology. And finally, also the tomato itself changed after the introduction of this machine. Because in order for the tomato to survive being harvested this way, it had to become bigger, sturdier, and stronger, because small, soft tomatoes would be crushed when harvested this way. And some people say since then tomatoes also became less tasty. So what I wanted to show with this example is basically that when you introduce a new technology into socio-technical systems, there are lots of consequences that might not be intended and that might also not be wholly foreseeable. And in a similar manner, it's also important to think about the biotechnology of salmon feed in this way. Because first of all, when we think about this, introducing a new type of feed, insect feed, this will need state investment or funding. So this raises questions about where public money should go. There will be a need for new regulations. So insect feed has to become a legible and governable entity, which raises a whole bunch of bureaucratic, administrative questions. There need to be frameworks and category systems to decide what actually counts as a sustainable food source. The aquaculture practices will most likely be impacted by the introduction of a new type of food source. And finally, also the taste of the fish might change. And this then affects, of course, the consumers and consumer choices. So, my last slide, and some of you might know this guy. So this is the supercomputer Deep Thought from Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker to the Galaxy novels. And when I'm done talking, it will make more sense why I chose this picture. So it is rather difficult to predict the implications of introducing a new technology into a bigger socio-technical system. So it's hard to predict. Some argue it's even impossible to predict. And this has to do with the fact, among other things, that with new technologies, with new biotechnologies such as salmon feed, we're talking about science in the making. So this is not ready-made, done science. So what the end product will look like is at the moment unclear. Yet, the problem becomes, so how to assess potential implications of such a technology if you don't already know what it will look like. And this problem has been described as the Coleridge dilemma. And what the Coleridge dilemma basically says is there is a need to assess the impact of novel technologies in their state of development, but it's not possible to accurately assess what the implications will be before it's fully developed and fully entrenched in society. The dilemma is that once it is fully developed and entrenched in society, it might no longer be possible to actually change it. Think about, for example, the internet or social media. Think about artificial intelligence. Right now, big debates on how it should be regulated. You can also think about the current legal problems with self-driving cars, or the big societal transition when it comes to energy, where it's very hard to kind of change from a given system we have now to something different. So some argue we might be locked in. And this brings me actually back to my title. So how to do this transition? How to organize a responsible introduction of new salmon feed sources into a given socio-technical system. And yeah, I don't have an answer yet. Also, my time is up, which is a nice coincidence. But I hope that I could make clear why it's important to ask these questions when introducing a seemingly a narrow technology, to also look at the socio-technical system that surrounds it. And this is where it comes in, because Deep Thought was tasked, a supercomputer in the world of Douglas Adams was tasked with the task to find the answer to all and every questions. And the answer was 42, right? And then, but what was the question that 42 is an answer to? And that basically shows us it's important to also think about the questions we're asking. Thanks very much.